Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the final week of ShakeTube 2018. A wonderful event. I had a wonderful time. I trust that I will see all of your eager faces next year for ShakeTube 2019. God knows what form it'll take or who will be involved. If I haven't alienated my co-host, I would like to co-host for that too. And I mentioned in my last few ShakeTube videos that I was going to wrap up ShakeTube 2018 not with a discussion of a play, although those have been a lot of fun. I have learned a lot, as I always do when I discuss Shakespeare with anybody, including people who've only read the same play for the first time. I've learned a lot from the comments and from the text messages and emails that resulted from the comments on those videos. That was wonderful. If there is a ShakeTube 2019, and if I'm involved in it, I think in 2019 I will go off the beaten track. I tried to make a point this year by picking well-trod plays that are well-known, that have been well-anthologized, plays that are so popular you might even have had a chance to see them acted in person. And I think my point was to do that was that there's an enormous amount of benefit in rereading an author like William Shakespeare. And I think next year, now that point's been made, I'll probably go off the beaten track and do some lesser-known stuff. But today, I'm not discussing a play. Today, instead, I'm discussing what we actually mean when we use that very easy phrase that I just used, an author like William Shakespeare. Who is this person? Who is that guy? That guy in the famous painting that has a bald forehead and a gold ring in his ear. In other words, today I want to talk a little bit about the Shakespeare Authorship Controversy, which has been dogged at the heels of Shakespeare studies for 200 years, maybe more than that, and whose loudest proponents can pack auditoriums and will tell you that the Shakespeare authorship question has been active since Shakespeare's own day, if you know where to look for examples of it. And hold on just a second. What are you doing? What are you doing? Baby, the floor is covered in Chewy toys. Ooh. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to be able to stop it. The point that I want to start off with when we talk about Shakespeare Authorship Controversy, since the word controversy brings up the point anyway, is something that I've mentioned on this channel before. Because if we deal with the Shakespeare Authorship Controversy, we are going to be dealing with a conspiracy theory. No other way to say it, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that term. It's like a friend of mine used to say, I'm okay with people calling me a conspiracy theorist, provided I get to call them a coincidence theorist. In other words, that sometimes there are conspiracies, and sometimes it's not lunatic to theorize about them. And the point that we've made on this channel many times when I have brought up conspiracy theories, to the point I love conspiracy theories, I just absolutely love them, and not just because they make history come alive, but also because they're thrilling intellectual puzzles. I think my love comes through because many, many of you over the years have suggested that I should start a separate channel just about conspiracy theories. And you know what? One person, I won't name names, but she's extremely savvy with the ways of YouTube. And one person said, if you did that, you would have 5 or even 10 times your subscriber count overnight that you have on this channel. I thought, well, okay, that might be true, but I'm not sure I'd want to meet any of those subscribers, whereas I want to meet every one of you. But anyway, the point that I've made on this channel many times when it comes to conspiracy theories is that in order for the conspiracy theory in question to be something that is thrilling, as opposed to just an annoying waste of time, it has to have a hook, at least one. It has to have at least one hook where when you, as a completely objective outsider, come to the issue for the first time and you're surveying the land, something snags at you. Where you're surveying the land and you're saying, okay, this entire story, let's say you come to a subject A, whatever it is, conspiracy theory subject A, the subject will always have a received history. Something that's in Wikipedia, something that mainstream scholars agree on, something that conspiracy theorists take aim at and hate. If you come to a conspiracy subject, cold and objective, and you read that official account, the sanded, official, accepted account of the subject, and something snags at you, then there is a tooth to the conspiracy theories that revolve around it. Without that snag, you have just lunatics, like the flat Earth people who have undergone since 2016, I wonder why, an enormous growth in membership and popularity online. There aren't any snags to the flat Earth delusion. There aren't any snags to that. So when you look at that, you say, okay, well, so the interesting thing here, and it is interesting, but the interesting thing here is pop psychoanalyzing the people who profess to believe this, not actually chasing the subject. But if you look at other subjects, and you look for hooks, you look for something that doesn't make sense, something that legitimately pops out from the official narrative, and makes even an objective observer with no dog in the race say, that is a little odd. And you can go down the list of the world's most popular conspiracy theorists, and you will always find something like that. That's what I think makes them so interesting and gives them their power to recruit outsiders. I've had friends of mine over the years note my love of conspiracy theorists and briefly worry that these things might recruit me. Usually that worrying happens over wine late at night, and usually the friends then come to the conclusion that that since I'm a greater megalomaniac than any of the megalomaniacs who are these theorists, it's unlikely that the sway would happen in that direction. My friends, in other words, I put friends in heavy air quotes, when they're a little tipsy, come to the conclusion that I'm crazier than any of them. And so I'm safe for them to go on being friends with. I tell you, the people I put up with. But anyway, if you look at any major conspiracy theory, you will find a hook. At least one. Where you look at it and you say, okay, that doesn't make sense, and then, in the best cases, you study it a little and it still doesn't make sense. In, for instance, one of the biggest conspiracy theories in American society is the death of JFK, shooting in Dealey Plaza, a subject about which I feel safe to say I know as much as any person alive. And there are hooks. You can say, I think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone from the Texas School Book Depository, just got off a lucky shot, the luckiest shot in the world. You can say that. That is the official version, and you can believe it, but you can also notice hooks. A great many of them. The shooting of Officer Tippit, the massive, seismic bungling of the autopsy. If it's bungling, the number of mistakes and the sheer size of the mistakes in the autopsy makes you think it wasn't bungling. After a point, you start to say, okay, so all these people made huge career-defining mistakes for the very first time. All of this evidence is missing. All of this secondary traces are contradictory. All of them are. You start to wonder, in other words, and you understand why people would make a career out of studying it. Same thing with the Martin Luther King assassination, where the forensic evidence does not at all line up with the visual evidence. Or the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Same thing, only in this case there's audio evidence that doesn't match up with the described events that took place. It just doesn't. And you don't have to be crazy to say that. You don't even have to reject the official line to say that. This is the important thing to say. People often think, well, I would pay a little bit more attention to the subject, but I don't want people to think I'm crazy. But it's not an either-or type thing. You can believe the received opinion and still note the things that don't make sense. Same thing with the September 11th attacks, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. There are quite a few elements in what is now the received official story of 9/11 that do not add up. They just don't. And no amount of easy vilification can make them add up. I don't have a dog in the race at all when it comes to something like that. I am slightly vested in President Kennedy, but only to the point of wanting to know what happened, not wanting to know, what somebody says happened. With 9/11, believe me, believe you me, I don't need help from any crackpot theorists operating in their ill-lit basements to dislike George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And they are, of course, the villains. of 9/11 conspiracy theories. So I guess my larger point is that when you come to a subject like of some sort of big historical question mark, you have to look for those hooks first. Because if they aren't there, if you read the received story and it makes perfect sense on its face, there's no point in digging deeper. It's only when it doesn't that there is. And that brings us to this guy. The guy with the bald forehead and the gold ring in his ear. Because when you read the official story of Shakespeare, you encounter hooks everywhere. None of it makes sense. Or not much of it does. When you go back and look at the facts of this man's life, let's say you're thrilled to do it. He has caused many great writers to write biographies of him. Great writers who write fantastic books. Peter Ackroyd. Who wouldn't want to read a new Peter Ackroyd book? Let's say you love the story of a provincial nobody who, through basically autodidactism, rises to the foremost rank of literary fame anywhere in the human history. Becomes one of the greatest writers in human history, largely through his own efforts, largely through his own genius. That is a great story. Who wouldn't want to read about that? Okay, that's the official story. Born in Stratford-on-Avon to a middling burgher family, not extremely wealthy, but not poor. Probably attended the Stratford Grammar School that was named after King Edward, and there is no record of Shakespeare attending that school, but it's not a bad inference. Granted, there are records of virtually every other class, virtually every other person. Okay, all right, fine. Let's say not everybody, it's not computerized. Let's say that it's acceptable that there is no written record of him going to that school. Okay, fine, but he probably would have. If his father was well-to-do, he would probably have gone to that school and received a basic grammar school education, which for the 15th, 16th century, well, we in the 21st century would consider it fairly extensive in terms of rhetoric and language. Then there's a blank period. There's a marriage. There are children. Then there's apparently some sort of theatrical experience in London. This person, William Shakespeare, leaves Stratford-on-Avon and goes to London. There are two elaborate poems that are written, signed by him, dedicated to a noble patron, and there is evidence of a theatrical career on the London stage and backing London theatrical companies. Worth noting here that if you are reading one of those biographies and you're thinking, oh, this is great, I want to learn all about this William Shakespeare person, by that point in the book, your antenna will already be quivering. You will have already encountered hooks. You will be saying, for instance, okay, well, that first detail that we mentioned is a little strange. We have the Stratford-on-Avon school records of second son of middling grain merchants. But we don't have it for William Shakespeare. No one's found it for the greatest author of all time. Okay, that's a little strange. And then there's all the rest of it. There's the huge lacunae right in the middle of the life, when it stands to reason that William Shakespeare would have been out in the world, accumulating experience, doing things, leaving a trail, and he did not. At least not that's been found so far, and I think it's safe to classify the search for original William Shakespeare documents as one of the most intense of any such literary searches that's ever been conducted. And yet, those documents, if you printed them on paper and filled a book, it would not be a long book, which is staggering right there. Then you look at the poems, the long dramatic poems. I have seen authors over the years, I have read authors over the centuries who did their best to make the case that those poems sound just like the plays, just like the verse in the plays that follow. And I don't see it. And I think if you read them out loud, pick a Shakespeare play that's heavy in verse, and read some of that verse out loud, and then read one of the narrative poems out loud alongside it, and you tell me that your first impression is that they were written by the same person. But okay, even so, people's styles can change, people can change as they grow older. All right, fine. Then this William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, leaves London, retires from the London stage, and goes back to Stratford to be a merchant. and he buys a big house, and he sues people, and he's sued by people, and he's in the small courts, and then he dies. The legend, uncorroborated, has it that he had a couple of literary friends at his house before he died. But he dies, he leaves a will. The will has an extremely contentious series of signatures that don't look like each other and don't look like anything that anyone would ever write if he spent his whole lifetime writing. Okay, you say, all right, could be a debilitating illness, could be why he died, maybe he was sick. The play is strange, as I'm sure you've heard already, even if you're only barely familiar with this subject. It does not mention his intellectual properties. It doesn't mention any intellectual properties at all. It mentions his worldly goods, his money, his second best bed, but it doesn't mention plays. It doesn't mention any of the work that would then, that would a few years later, go into the first folio with a portrait on it of William Shakespeare, and all of this work attributed to him, many of which had never been attributed to him under his own name, in the, basically what we would consider the paperback versions of his plays that have been circulating in London. So, if you are completely neutral, completely objective, and you go into that story, you go into some new biography of Shakespeare, and you think, okay, well, I want to learn all about this guy, you will quickly find yourself encountering supposition instead of fact. You will quickly find yourself encountering reconstruction instead of facts, instead of an actual documentary trail. You will go into that book, if you open a 250-page biography of William Shakespeare alongside a 250-page biography of his contemporary, Ben Jonson, and read the two, you will see the difference that I'm talking about, but you wouldn't need to read the Jonson book to see it. And plenty of people have, obviously, famously. Plenty of famous people, politicians, Sigmund Freud, whatever the hell he was, Mark Twain, a whole bunch of other writers, philosophers of all kinds, many playwrights, many actors, have done that exact same thing. They launched themselves into a life of William Shakespeare looking for the greatest story in literature. A barefoot boy from the provinces who becomes William Shakespeare, becomes the greatest writer of all time. Who wouldn't want to read that story? They go in, all these people at all these different times over the last 250 years, they go into that story looking for that, and they don't find it. Not with all the best will in the world can you find that story. You cannot. You can find an author, like Stanley Wells or whoever, somebody who has a long investment in the industry of Shakespeare studies. You can find them telling you that story. But if you're like me and you start a big biography at the back instead of the front, you look at the notes, you look at the factual underpinning, you're perfectly happy being told a good story, but you want to know what's the basis for you telling me that story. You won't find it. Unless you're willing to do a whole lot of willing suspension of disbelief. A whole lot more of that than you have to do for anyone else, any other subject. If you're willing to do that, fine. Then the Shakespeare story holds together just barely. He is not present in that story. That is the hook. The mother of all hooks is that when you go looking for that William Shakespeare in that story, you do not find him. You find the story, but you don't find the man. Everywhere you look where you would think you would find him, in every primary document where you would think he would show up, he's not. Leading biographers and scholars to just do over and over again in their books, to say over and over again, well, the supposition is likely, the overwhelming preponderance of the probability is there, it almost certainly is true, over and over again, that kind of construction. And that realization over the course of time has given rise to the current industry of Shakespeare authorship controversy. Too many people have done that exercise and come away saying, no, I didn't go in as a nut job. I wanted to find that person, and he's not there. Too many people experience that. Now what are you chewing on? Frida, will you settle down? Oh, God, we walked her feet off, and she's still chewing on anything that moves. Anyway, that was the main thing that I want to say about the William Shakespeare authorship controversy. Is that it deserves to be real. It's not like some other fake controversies that exist in the 21st century, like vaccines or the flat earth. There are hooks aplenty. The biggest one of all is that Shakespeare is missing from too much of his own story to make that story comfortable in any way. And over time, the frustration of that, looking into that story and not finding what you want, has led all those kinds of people that I just talked about, and plenty of other scholars and non-scholars, to fill in the blanks. They have nominated, by now it must be hundreds of candidates, because it seems like the natural thing to do. If you look into a biography of Shakespeare, the facts of Shakespeare's life, and you come out saying, well, okay, I don't know who I just read about there, but it certainly wasn't the author of King Lear. The natural human propensity is then to say, well, okay, if he didn't write King Lear, then who did? And the authors have not resisted that urge. So candidates have come forward everywhere. Francis Bacon, for one time, ruled the roost. Christopher Marlowe, of course, is a perfectly natural candidate, despite the fact that he dies way too early to be responsible for most of Shakespeare's plays. But he's a perfect candidate otherwise, because, like Shakespeare, he had an absolutely a new revelation in terms of diction, in terms of the rhetoric of his writing. It was like nothing that anyone had seen before, and bears lots of similarities to Shakespeare. The Shakespeare scholars say that's because they knew each other's work. Shakespeare conspiracy theorists say it's because they were the same person. The problem with Marlowe and with a great many other candidates, Bacon would be a good example in a different way, is the same problem is true in all kinds of conspiracy theorist thinking. The thing you have to watch for in conspiracy theorists is your theory, never mind for a minute the conspiracies, we've talked about the conspiracies, but is your theory explaining the conspiracy, does it have more or fewer moving parts than the official version? And it just stands to reason that if in your conspiracy theory, your explanation, you are positing all sorts of things that require explanations of their own, you are probably wrong. That's just Occam's razor. It's just as simple as that. So, if, for instance, again, we're not crediting flat Earth with anything here, but the flat Earth, if you want to call it a theory, relies on, for instance, a gigantic breviary of other things, of other claims, all of them unsourced, all of them unprovable. A worldwide conspiracy stretching over 2,000 years to defraud the public into believing that the Earth is round, spearheaded by the Freemasons, or whatever. In other words, if your explanation for the thing that you want to explain, for the official theory that you want to debunk, is full of things that require their own explanations, then that's a sign that your thinking is weak. And the same thing is true, for instance, with proposing Marlowe as a candidate for the authorship of the Shakespeare plays, because we know when Marlowe died. If you say that Marlowe was the author of the plays, you have to say either that he didn't die in an extremely headline-grabbing way with an official royal inquest on the premises within a day, that he didn't, that was somehow not him. Or you have to say that there was a body there and all of that was real, but that the body wasn't Marlowe. He went off somewhere else, like to Italy, and just sent plays over to London to a theatrical group in order for them to act them year by year. No proof for any of that. Same thing if you're Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon wasn't exactly idle in his life. He was extremely busy and extremely well documented. If you posit that he worked the Merchant of Venice in on an odd hour, you had better have the ability to prove it, and there isn't anything like that. Here, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Down on the floor. Get down on the floor. There you go. If you're crazy enough to chew wires, then you stay down on the floor. Stay there until I'm done. Okay? Okay, where was I? Oh, yes. And even more so, Queen Elizabeth I, who's also been put forward as a candidate for the office of Shakespeare's plays. You see the problem. If you don't believe the Shakespeare story, that's fine. If you put forward something that's even less believable, then you're not helping anything anyway. And as far as I'm concerned, none of those candidates passed that test, including what I would think is probably the foremost candidate now of them all, Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. whose the written outline of his life mirrors a lot of what we see in, for instance, Hamlet, but also in other plays. The outrageous elements of a lot of his biography are echoed in Shakespeare's plays, sometimes with a great deal of specificity, enough to make proponents of the Oxfordian theory just sure of themselves. You'll never read a surer book than you will a conspiracy theory book by an Oxfordian. They just are sure they have the right guy. There are problems with dates. Again, Oxford died too early, but they get around that, and it's not convincing. I think the reason why Shakespeare Authorship Controversy people are derided so easily is because they take that extra step. What I propose in this video is that we do something here that no one has ever done. That we break new ground here in this video and just say the first half. We will deny our human nature and just say the first half of this construction, which is that the facts that the settled history of William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, the facts of his life put together, say beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was not the author of the plays. Based on what we know, not based on what we assume in retrospect because of the plays and because his face is on the first folio. Take that out of the question and just say, from what we know of the merchant from Stratford-on-Avon, who spent time in London as a theater player and may or may not have written 2 poems, could what we know of that person make us believe that he wrote these plays? The answer is a resounding no. That Shakespeare, the Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, the anti-Shakespeare people will call him the man from Stratford, or Shakespeare. They won't call him William Shakespeare because they believe William Shakespeare is a completely different person. But the problem is, when they believe William Shakespeare is a completely different person, they then can't keep their mouth shut. So they go on from there and make fools of themselves. But for the purposes of this video, we can say with almost complete certainty that if the facts of William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon's life are basically what we know, and and this, of course, is the big if, because there could be a huge period of his life about which we know nothing that might come to life. An archive in Italy, something like that, would do it. That would do it. Nothing like that conspicuously has ever appeared. But if it did, that would do it. But right now, the facts that we know about this man make it pretty comfortable for us to say that no matter who wrote the plays that we know so well, he did not. Any more than any of his Stratford schoolmates did. They all went on to become bull punchers or grain merchants of one kind or another, and not a word of verse to their names. I think that for the purposes of this video, the end of ShakeTube 2018, we should stop there. We should say, when it comes to the Shakespeare authorship controversy, well, I do have an opinion. I don't think Shakespeare wrote the plays. And when the person that you say that to immediately follows up with, well, who did? Say, I have no idea. I have no idea at all. It could be that the person that William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon wrote them. But if he did, there's a huge amount about his life that we don't know. If you're saying that we know mostly about his life, then he didn't write the plays. And I don't have a candidate for who did, and why, and how it was put under his name, or anything like that. Any step you take in the direction of filling in those blanks will lead you into proposing new mysteries. And every time a conspiracy theorist proposes new mysteries, without a shred of fact to back it up, they make things muddier instead of clearer. So that is my take on one of the greatest literary controversies of them all. The Shakespeare authorship controversy, in my opinion, has an easy answer. No, William Shakespeare, as written, William Shakespeare as we know him, did not write these plays. Period. Full stop. Not I think so-and-so did. Not I think this must be missing from Shakespeare's biography. Not I think this must have happened to make the whole story work. No, just the story that you have told me, the Wikipedia entry that you have read to me, does not make sense. And that's as far as I'm willing to go. That doesn't make sense. So that's, in case you were wondering, that's my take on the Shakespeare authorship controversy. I think it's valid, is as valid as any authorship controversy, any conspiracy theory controversy can be, in that there's a genuine and undeniable hook, something that does not make sense when you read it, which is the life or death of any conspiracy theory. So I'm going to wrap this video up for now and go find out what's wrong with my puppy. But that's it for ShakeTube 2018. We had a great time. We read plays, we read poems, we talked about all sorts of things. I enjoyed it quite a bit. We're ringing out all of the September read-along and reading events and preparing for a massive October. I don't know if you saw the color-coded calendar that the restricted section put out. The number of events in October is enormous, more than anyone could do, so we have to pick and choose. But I'll see you all again next year for ShakeTube 2019. Right? You want to read about Pericles with me now, don't you? Anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.